Chuck Sirica was sitting in his apartment in New York City, unable to pull his eyes off the scene shown on his television. Chuck was watching the devastation happening 60 blocks from where he sat. The South Tower collapsed into a cloud of dust. It was then that Chuck received a message from his estranged sister. "Chuck, I'm hoping you're okay. I'm sure you're down there helping." But helping was the last thing on Chuck's mind. Chuck had just returned to New York after a stint in rehab for drug and alcohol abuse and was dealing with issues stemming from depression. And while Chuck was a former paramedic, he had let his license expire, had no intention of going down to that scene. Chuck was going to stay where it was safe. Unfortunately for Chuck, that message from his sister kept eating away at him. With the intention of going only to be able to tell his sister, "Yeah, I was there helping," and only wanting to help in the triage area, Chuck grabbed an old blue paramedic shirt and headed to the local hospital, where he talked his way onto an ambulance and then headed to the scene. In the time it took Chuck to leave his apartment and arrive at the scene, the North Tower had collapsed. The entire area looked like a freak snowstorm in September due to all the dust and debris from the collapsing buildings. Looking around to try and find an easy way to help that would keep him out of harm's way, Chuck was spotted by a retired Marine Staff Sergeant who said, "Great, the help has arrived." Chuck laughed in his head, knowing that he had no intention of entering the site. Chuck was afraid of both heights and fire, both of which were plentiful in the 7-story pile. As Chuck stood there at the edge of the pile, something unexpected happened. Chuck took a step forward. Not knowing why his body was moving him forward against his will, Chuck kept climbing the pile and joining the efforts to recover the almost 2,000 people trapped in the rubble. "Our God will come to save us," was our response to today's psalm. It's a fitting theme for today's readings. Today's gospel, we see Jesus challenged by the Pharisees yet again, this time for the audacious act of forgiving sins of a paralytic. "Who is this that speaks blasphemies? Who but God alone can forgive sins?" Now, Jesus could have said and done a lot to respond here to this criticism, and it's easy for us, knowing the whole story, to think, wow, boy, did they have it wrong. But Jesus doesn't completely reveal himself. He doesn't give a big speech. He simply says, which is easier, to forgive the man's sins or to tell him to get up and walk? Obviously, telling a paralytic to get up and walk would be impossible. Only God could do that, right? But that is what Jesus did. That man, paralyzed from birth, got up, picked up his mat, and walked away. As we continue this Advent season, our focus is not on the ever-growing list of gifts to buy and parties to attend, but rather on the coming Savior, Jesus Christ, a Savior that came into the world in humility, simply for our forgiveness, our healing, and our salvation. As Chuck continued up that pile, he came across the hole in the rubble, and he could hear cries for help. The thought crossed his mind to getting into that hole and helping those people. And as he crawled in, he began to remove rubble, eventually freeing the trapped men and women in Stairway B. Chuck later said, "Maybe it's in my character to help people, because I've done it for so long, but it wasn't even a thought. The only reason I ended up there is because I didn't want to let my sister down. The rest was just God." Chuck was just happy to sit there and watch the devastation from a distance, but something within him pushed him forward. It was as if God said, "Get up and walk." What is our response to God when he pulls us in directions we don't want to go? Do we stay where we are? Or do we pick up our mat and walk with the Lord? Chuck got up and walked. Because of him, the last survivors were pulled from the World Trade Centers and what would later become known as the miracle of Stairway B.